So let's say you want to gather data by observing people or animals in their natural habitats or just doing stuff. What do you need to know to make sure that works out well? Well, first of all, one of the most common ways to gather data through observation is through the use of criteria. A criteria is a set of rules or a rule for something people are looking for. A very common study was a book called the Bobo the Doll study, where children were shown adults playing with a doll called Bobo the Doll, and the adults would sometimes be mean to them, or some of the adults would be nice to the doll, and then they would let the kids play with the doll. So, how are people going to get information by watching those kids, by observing the way they interact with the doll? They set up a series of criteria. They said, okay, well, uh, did the child make verbal threats or physical threats? Did the child actually perform violence or violence with a tool like a hammer or a gun? Another thing you can use are the amount of occurrences for the criteria or the duration of the criteria. Those are pretty easy ways to assign numbers to things going on in the world that you can then analyze or work with mathematically. Another thing that's useful in observational research is the use of recording and coding. So obviously, when you're watching something happen in live time, it's easy to miss information. So a lot of times researchers will video record or audio record things that are happening, but even that might be too much to work with. So what we can do is time sampling. Time sampling is when a researcher will wait or check what's going on every 10 seconds or every minute or once an hour after a certain interval. So they can assess what's going on in each one of those given moments and then use that data. Instead of watching for every single thing that's going on, it might be too difficult and you might not need to spend all of that effort. In this example here, what we've got is an observation of children in a classroom. You've got criteria on the left. Did the children space out? Did they talk when they weren't supposed to? Did they touch their peers? Did they do all these different things? And they would just check at a certain interval of time, in this case every half hour. So at 2 o'clock, was there any children doing things like playing with objects? In this case, yes, but there weren't any children out of their seat. At 2:30, this was still going on, but another thing had happened. And so you can see how this form of data gathering makes it a lot easier to assess or gather data from observation without having to gather data for so many hours. And you note that here we have some comments about what happened just to make sure that we have enough information of what was going on. Okay, a couple more sampling methods for observation. If you want to gather data about people's real life, you can't necessarily have them live their lives in the laboratory. So what you can do is have them go about their daily lives and gather data from them either through the use of journals or some sort of messaging system. When you have people gather data in a journal, it's kind of up to them to tell you everything that they want to say. So a lot of therapists will use journals. Say a therapist has noticed that you are not sleeping enough, or therapist has noticed that you lie all the time and you're wanting to get better on that. What you can do is every night make a note of how things went, or in the morning make a note of how things went in your journal. And this just helps keep you accountable, helps keep track of the information for you and your therapist. But for researchers too, you could just have people turn the journal in and look at the data. Another way people do this is through the use of texting, like I mentioned, or apps. So they will do something that's kind of like time sampling for real life. Let's say people are researching how well do people stay on task when they've taken a certain medication. So they take the medication every day, and then at just random moments throughout the day, they text the person a question. Are you currently doing what you meant to be doing, or are you lazing out, or are you just getting distracted? It's a pretty good way to gather data about real life without having to gather a bajillion data points and without having to screw up your participant by having someone follow them all the time. As with every type of measurement, it's always important to be careful about your validity. So what can we do to be careful about validity for observing research? Well, it's never going to be perfect, but there are some things that we can do. Of course, we've talked about inter-rater validity in previous sections, but you can also improve your inter-rater reliability and inter-rater validity through the use of training. You can always teach or practice so that your raters, so that your observers give consistent answers that are meaningful and useful. You can also be careful about a presence effect. Like I said, it can be dangerous to have a person follow someone else around all the time. But not just that, if you have a researcher watching you, you might not necessarily act the way that you would in real life. You know, if you're doing research on how often people pick their noses, you're probably never going to see anyone pick their nose if someone is watching them all the time and they know that they're being watched for nose picking, right? Finally, bias is something you want to be careful about. Any sort of prejudice or reason why people might not want to see something, or maybe people would want to see something. Let's say you ask a bunch of parents to make notes every time their child does something mean. Well, most parents are going to avoid saying that their children were mean, so they might give them the benefit of the doubt. And if you ask them to note every time a different child does something mean, well, they might really dislike that child. So maybe they would be less willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, or maybe they would be totally neutral because it's someone else's kid. I don't know, but it's important to be careful about that sort of thing. All right, in the last section, we'll take a look at how to put together a methods section.